You know that feeling when you're scrolling, you see a viral headline, completely buy into whatever outrageous claim it's making, and then maybe hours later, you realize the logic was just totally flawed? Yeah, it happens to the absolute best of us. Look, every single day we're getting bombarded with a relentless stream of claims, opinions, and skewed data, all fighting for our attention and our agreement. But honestly, how often do we actually stop to test the structural integrity of those arguments? Not just fact-checking, but examining the actual framework holding those facts together. Well, today we're going to assemble a highly practical mental toolkit in this explainer. We're going to build your capacity for critical reasoning right from the ground up, turning you from a passive consumer of information into an active analytical thinker who actually demands the truth. So, what does it actually mean to exist? I know, it's a massive, heavy question, but we really have to start here to understand what truly separates us humans from, well, everything else in the universe. Philosophers like Martin Heidegger pointed out that non-human entities, a stone, a tree, a massive mountain, they don't really exist in an active, engaged kind of way. A mountain just sits there, right? It's just scattered across the universe, subject to the elements. What makes human existence completely unique is our capacity to look at that mountain and ask, why is that there? We have this incredible, unique ability to question, to doubt, and to rigorously assess our own thoughts and the reality around us. And to find absolute certainty in that reality, the philosopher René Descartes literally locked himself away and subjected every single one of his fundamental beliefs to brutal, systematic questioning. Just picture this. He's sitting alone in his cabin, literally doubting if his own hands were real. He doubted if the sky was real, if his memories were just illusions. He basically denied the truth of absolutely everything until he hit absolute rock bottom. But there was one single thing he found impossible to deny. He was the entity doing the doubting. The very act of questioning his reality proved that he was real. His self-awareness, driven by critical thought, was the ultimate undeniable evidence of his existence. Okay, here's our roadmap for the explainer today. First, I think, therefore I am. Second, thinking versus critical reasoning. Third, the anatomy of arguments. Fourth, deduction, induction, and abduction. And finally, overcoming critical thinking barriers. Let's jump right into section 1. I think, therefore I am. That highly inquisitive nature we just explored with Descartes, it's not just some fun philosophical parlor trick. It is the absolute bedrock of critical reasoning. You see, human beings don't just passively experience the world. We actively create, organize, and reorganize our reality through questioning. Whenever we ask a question, we're basically trying to force order onto a chaotic universe. Argument and critical reasoning are completely intrinsically linked to our very state of being, because without self-awareness and that drive to doubt, we'd really just be processing inputs like a machine, rather than actually understanding them. Moving on to section 2, thinking versus critical reasoning. Okay, so there is a massive difference between the chaotic storm of everyday thinking and the precise, tuned machinery of reasoning. Thinking can be wild, it can be unorganized, or driven by momentary passions. I mean, even fleeting hunches count as thinking. Biologically speaking, it's just the baseline electrochemical processes firing away in our nervous system. So wandering around wondering if penguins have knees, that's thinking. But building a structured, logical proof about avian anatomy based on solid biological evidence, now that is reasoning. Reasoning is a highly conscious, critical, and logical process. It involves deliberately drawing inferences from established premises to arrive at a rock-solid conclusion. When we step into the realm of reasoning, we literally have to leave our raw emotions at the door and demand verifiable evidence. And to reason critically, we have to play by a strict set of rules known as the 3 laws of thought. The first one is the principle of identity. A thing is exactly what it is, and nothing else. Stated in technical terms, if any proposition is true, then it is true. P is P. I know it sounds almost laughably simple to say a baby is a baby, but this absolute rule is the anchor of all logic. Why? Because without it, language and meaning completely collapse. If words don't have fixed, unchanging meanings throughout a conversation, well, communication is basically impossible. A thing cannot magically morph into something else halfway through a logical sequence. Now, the second law acts as a strict boundary line, keeping our mental toolkit totally free from self-contradictory beliefs. Basically, no proposition can be both true and false at the exact same time. If I confidently state, Otto is a scholar, and then in the very next breath declare Otto is not a scholar, one of those statements has to be inherently wrong. A proposition that attempts to exist as both true and false simultaneously, literally self-destructs. It just explodes the moment you try to use it as a foundation for any kind of argument. And the third law reinforces everything by completely eliminating any gray area. No middle ground whatsoever for a proposition's truth value. It has to be strictly true or strictly false. Think about it like this.
It is either raining in London right now, or it isn't. There's no mystical third option for the truth value of that specific statement at this exact moment. A standard logical proposition maintains its truth value decisively. It either is, or it just isn't.
All right, let's look at Section 3, the anatomy of arguments.
Logic isn't just some abstract swirl of ideas floating around in our heads. It has a rigid architecture. If we treat arguments like a physical construction site, the premises are our building blocks. A premise is simply a proposition that provides the hard evidence, the ground floor for your argument. Then the inference is the mortar. It's the logical mental jump that actually binds those blocks together. And finally, the conclusion is the roof placed on top, supported entirely by what is underneath it. And let's just pause here for a second. If your premises are weak, or actually if your inferential mortar is mixed poorly, what happens? Boom, the roof caves in. The entire argument collapses under its own weight. To navigate the real world, you really need to be able to instantly spot whether someone is actually making a structured argument or if they're just yelling an opinion at you. And the cheat codes for this? They're called structural indicators. Words like since, because, or given that are basically massive neon signs pointing directly to a premise. On the flip side, words like therefore, hence, or consequently point directly to a conclusion. Isolating these pieces is your #1 job as a critical thinker. If a passage of text is just expressing raw emotion, issuing a command, or rambling without these indicators, it lacks architecture. It is not an argument. It's just a statement. Which brings us to a notorious trap that catches even incredibly smart people, confusing a valid argument with a sound one. You see, validity only cares about the form. If your premises logically force your conclusion, the structure is perfectly valid, even if the premises are absolute fiction. For example, premise 1, all cows are purple. Premise 2, Bessie is a cow. Conclusion, therefore, Bessie is purple. The logical structure there is flawless. The blocks support the roof perfectly. It's 100% valid. But since we know cows aren't actually purple, the promise is false, meaning the argument is utterly unsound. For an argument to be sound, it must be valid, and the premises have to be factually true in the real world. Soundness is the absolute gold standard here.
Next up, Section 4, Deduction, Induction, and Abduction.
So depending on the evidence we have available to us, we have to build our arguments using entirely different blueprints. Deductive reasoning demands absolute certainty. It takes universal laws and applies them to a particular instance to guarantee a result. It's an ironclad lock. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, operates on weighted scales of probability. It gathers particular observations to induce a likely outcome. Imagine you've got a mystery bag, and you pull out 3 black balls in a row. You inductively reason that the next ball will probably be black, right? That's moving from the particular to the universal. Induction gives us incredibly strong or incredibly weak arguments, but unlike deduction, it never ever gives us absolute certainty. And then sometimes we're thrown into a situation after the fact and we basically have to work backward. This is abductive reasoning. Instead of providing evidence to definitively prove a conclusion, abduction looks at a messy set of facts and asks, okay, what is the best possible explanation for why these facts exist? Imagine walking into your living room, you find a shattered vase on the floor, and your cat is sitting there looking incredibly guilty. You didn't deduce the cat broke it from some universal law of physics, and you didn't induce it by watching the cat break 3 other vases. You are abducing the most logical, practical explanation for the specific evidence sitting right in front of you. Let's hit our final section, overcoming critical thinking barriers. Listen, knowing the rules of logic isn't enough. We actually have to diagnose the mental barriers that trip us up in everyday life. A lot of people misunderstand criticism as pure negativity, so they just avoid analyzing arguments entirely to remain polite. Others vastly overestimate their own reasoning abilities simply because they won a debate once, failing to realize their opponent might have just given up out of exhaustion. We also suffer from a deep reluctance to question experts, totally forgetting that in critical reasoning, literally nobody gets a free pass from logic. But perhaps the most dangerous pitfall in today's digital era, mistaking mere information for actual understanding. Just because you consumed a dozen articles today absolutely does not mean you deeply logically understand the architecture of the claims they made. To truly overcome these barriers, we have to practice taking messy, real-world language and translating it into clear, naked propositions. Think about a fiery political speech. It's loaded with buzzwords, emotional appeals, and dramatic pauses, right? Well, to evaluate it, you have to mentally strip away all of that emotional theater. You locate the core subject. You find the core predicate. You string them together to find the actual, naked claim being made. Once you distill a screaming headline or an impassioned speech down to its basic structural premise,
it becomes remarkably easy to see if it's logically sound or if it's just a house built on sand.
So I'll leave you with this. Don't let this toolkit just sit there gathering dust in your mind. You now know the laws of thought, you know the structural anatomy of premises and conclusions, and you know the crucial difference between absolute deduction and probable induction. The next time you watch a debate or read an article, actively look for those building blocks, check the mortar of the inference, ask yourself if that roof is truly supported by reality. Because in a world where literally everyone is aggressively trying to sell you their version of the truth, your ability to quickly and accurately dismantle their arguments is your ultimate defense mechanism. So what is the very first claim you're going to deconstruct today?